Air Transat Airlines Flight 236 was en route from Toronto to Lisbon. It was the dead of night, and the aircraft was cruising at an altitude of 39,000 feet over the vast Atlantic Ocean. This was a routine situation for pilots. Nothing seemed abnormal. But there was something on board that within moments was about to change everything. At an altitude of 39,000 feet above the Atlantic, there was no land in sight. That's when the captain suddenly realized that the plane was about to run out of fuel. For both pilots, this was a terrifying situation because running out of fuel over the ocean had only one meaning: death. Welcome to Tales of the Past. Today, we bring you the incredible story of Flight 236. This incident took place on August 23, 2001 at Toronto Pearson Airport. An Air Transat Airbus A330 was being prepared for its non-stop flight to Lisbon. This was a 7-hour journey, and for that reason, 48 metric tons of fuel were loaded into the aircraft. After all preparations were complete, boarding commenced. At that time, it was 9 p.m. local time. Flight 236 had 293 passengers and 13 crew members, including 2 pilots. The flight's captain, 48-year-old Robert P. Shea, had an impressive 16,000 hours of flight experience. His first officer, 28-year-old Doug DeJager, also had 5,000 hours of flying experience, with 400 hours specifically on the Airbus A330. The aircraft itself was a state-of-the-art Airbus A330 model, only 2 years old. Everything seemed to be in perfect order. Neither the pilot's experience nor the aircraft's condition raised any concerns. After completing all pre-flight checks, the pilots taxied Flight 236 to the runway. Upon receiving clearance from air traffic control, they took off. After departure, the pilots set the aircraft's heading toward Lisbon across the Atlantic Ocean. Within minutes, the aircraft reached its cruising altitude of 39,000 feet. On long-haul flights like this, pilots usually have little active work because the autopilot system handles most tasks. They mainly monitor the aircraft's status and communicate updates to air traffic control. 4 hours into the flight, everything seemed normal. Most passengers were asleep due to the late hour. Flight 236 was now at the center of the Atlantic Ocean. At 1 a.m. Canadian time, the pilots noticed an abnormal reading from engine number 2, the right engine. The oil pressure appeared unusually high, the oil quantity was low, and the oil temperature was abnormally low. This was an error neither pilot had encountered in their careers. The pilots immediately consulted the flight manual to get some information regarding this specific error. Normally, as the aircraft operates, the oil temperature increases with time. However, in this case, it was indicating a low temperature. That was definitely not normal. They couldn't find any information about this error on the flight manual. They contacted Air Transat's maintenance unit in Canada for assistance. Unfortunately, even the maintenance team had no prior knowledge of such an error. The maintenance unit advised the pilots to monitor the situation and promised to follow up shortly. Since the aircraft was flying smoothly despite the abnormal readings, the pilots assumed it was just a faulty sensor. Half an hour later, another warning message appeared, not related to oil, but to fuel. Commercial aircraft store fuel distributed evenly across both wings. However, it was observed that Flight 236 had an imbalance. There was less fuel in the right wing than in the left. Under normal circumstances, this issue could be corrected mid-flight. The captain opened the crossfeed valve, allowing fuel from the left wing to flow into the right wing. Within minutes, the fuel levels in both wings were equal again. Just 10 minutes later, a far more serious warning appeared. low fuel. For a pilot, this is one of the worst nightmares, especially when flying over the ocean with a plane full of passengers. The captain saw that fuel levels in the right wing had once again dropped, and now even the total remaining fuel wasn't enough to reach Lisbon. At this point, the situation became critical. In the middle of the Atlantic, diversion options were extremely limited. In reality, they had only one choice: the Azores Islands. These islands are part of Portuguese territory in the Atlantic Ocean, with an airport on Terceira Island. The captain immediately contacted Santa Maria ATC and informed them of the fuel shortage and their intent to land at Terceira Airport. However, the pilots were still unsure whether they would even make it that far or if they would have to ditch in the ocean. At this point, the aircraft had 7 tons of fuel remaining, around 7,000 kilograms. While this might sound like a lot, it was only 6% of the A330's full fuel capacity, and it was depleting at an alarming rate. The question was, why was the fuel disappearing so quickly? Was this another faulty sensor giving false readings, or was the fuel truly vanishing? The only possibility for actual fuel loss was a leak. To confirm, the captain instructed the flight crew to inspect the trailing edge of the right wing. If fuel was leaking, there would be visible signs. However, due to the darkness, the crew could not see anything unusual. Fuel continued to vanish, 1 ton every 5 minutes. The captain realized that the aircraft had only 25 minutes of fuel left, which meant even reaching Terceira Airport was not possible. Meanwhile, the captain and the first officer were continuously in contact with the maintenance unit and ATC. The maintenance unit gave Captain the instructions to descend the aircraft from 39,000 feet to 20,000 feet to confirm the fuel leakage. But the captains denied to do so, as they believed even if the fuel leakage was confirmed, it wouldn't be possible for the aircraft to ascend back up. At least, they still have the option of gliding at 39,000 feet. In the next few minutes, all doubts were clear. When a fire erupted from the right engine of the aircraft, panic erupted inside the aircraft. Passengers, who had been peacefully asleep, were now engulfed in fear. The plane had only 4.5 tons of fuel left and just one working engine. Flying on a single engine was nearly impossible, so the aircraft began descending rapidly. Meanwhile, emergency response teams at Terceira Airport prepared for an emergency landing. Fire trucks and emergency crews initiated their preparations to handle any kind of situation. Flight 236 was still 240 kilometers away from the airport, with only 600 kilograms of fuel remaining. Then, the inevitable happened. The left engine also failed due to running at full thrusts for too long. With both engines dead, Flight 236 became a powerless glider over the Atlantic. At this moment, the captain's earlier decision not to descend to 20,000 feet proved wise. They now had more altitude to glide. With engines offline, the cabin plunged into darkness as electrical systems failed. Fortunately, the ram air turbine, RAT, deployed automatically. This small turbine, powered by airspeed, generated just enough electricity to keep critical cockpit instruments functioning. Terceira Airport was still 120 kilometers away. The aircraft had descended to 30,000 feet. The pilots had to glide all the way. Inside the cabin, an eerie silence and darkness created an atmosphere of dread. The worst-case scenario was that if the aircraft couldn't reach the airport, it would have to land in the ocean. For this reason, flight attendants began preparing passengers for a possible ditching in the ocean. Landing in ocean is dangerous in every way, because if the passengers survive the impact, they risk drowning. If saved from that, they can get hypothermia. Normally, it is very difficult to glide a passenger plane without engines. Everything was dependent on plane's pitch control, which the pilot was manually controlling using the stick. The aircraft continued its controlled glide, losing altitude at a rate of 2,000 feet per minute, which means that in the next 15 minutes, the plane will either reach the airport or end up in the ocean. With 15 kilometers remaining, the aircraft was still at 13,000 feet. Ideally, it should have been at 3,000 feet. Now, if the pilot lowers its altitude by performing a nosedive, the speed of plane will be very fast, and in this situation, the possibility of crash landing was very high. To reduce altitude without overspeeding, the captain executed a 360-degree turn. By the time the turn was complete, the altitude had dropped to 5,000 feet. This altitude was still high, but not high enough to perform another 360-degree rotation. The pilots then aligned with the runway and executed S-turns to further decrease altitude. In normal conditions, during landing, the flaps are extended to create drag, and engine thrust is increased, causing the plane's nose to pitch up, but with no engine thrust available. Landing was extremely dangerous. The pilots had one chance to land the plane, either make it or break it. In the end, the aircraft touched down hard on the runway, bursting 8 out of 12 tires. It skidded, but finally came to a stop. Flames erupted from the landing gear, but emergency crews quickly extinguished them. Flight 236 set a world record as the longest passenger plane glide without engines. Investigations revealed that in maintenance, crew had replaced a part of engine, but that part belonged to a different plane. Due to loose fitting, it caused vibrations which burst the fuel line passing nearby. After this incident, Airbus installed a new system that allows pilots to detect fuel leakage during flight in the future. A year later, Captain Robert P. Shea and First Officer Drick de Jager were awarded the Superior Airmanship Award for their heroic dead-stick landing. Make sure to check out more such stories in our channel.